So I guess, we had this conversation earlier this week where we kind of like primed a little bit of what we were going to be talking about. And one of the things that struck me was this sort of like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but this sort of like push pull that you have, and like the various aspects of your life. You have two daughters, teenage daughters, is that right? So I get that
One of
right?
them's a teenager. Thank
Okay.
God I only got one. So the other one's 10 years old. So the other one is
Oh,
catching up quick.
you have a teenager and a teenager. Yeah, that's
Yes. Yeah.
uh
Who thinks she's 16? So maybe it's all the same. I don't know.
um so you have this push pull going on with your various roles of like, you're a dad, to two daughters, and yet you also have in like your life you've had this like really adventurous, outside, like doing crazy, not crazy things, but like having kind of wild experiences. And you know in a way that's kind of like the thing that people see sometimes. They're like, I don't want to get tamed by like my family, like I think that's like a cliche. It's like a weird cliche, but like, like I don't want to get tamed by my family. And you're kind of living that fine line of trying to find where your like adventurous wildlife world, like wildland firefighter, like, on the front lines type like life exists, along with this like raising two daughters thing, which is, equally kind of adventurous, but very, very different type of adventure.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting. So early on, like when so Annie's my wife, and, we found out, hey, we're going to have a kid, pregnant, super excited. Both of us had kind of been thinking about that for some time. And I remember, like the birth, right? It was the most amazing thing ever. And we can kind of maybe go however you want to set it up. But long story short, like I was really excited about being a father, having a family. Like family's always been a huge thing for me. And I never felt that kind of, I didn't want to have kids because it was gonna, take my identity away, and that whole thing. Now, you fast forward 10, 12 years, and yeah, like I think I've and a little bit of it is career, and just having just life in general kind of get out of balance, and giving myself, like emptying my cup for so many years, and not just with family, but with, career, and job, and everything else, to where, yeah, like that's probably a good, you know a good way to describe it. I've never heard it said that way, like, being tamed. And so there's like, yeah, that like inner me trying to, figure out what adventures, like, my identity as a man, as a father, right, as a boss, as an employee, like, where do I fit in, and who am I? And looking back, like a lot of that was defined by the crazy things I was doing. So yeah.
I have this like weird thing where I'm not 100% sure. It's like there's no clarity to me how that sense of identity is best developed, right? Because you just listed off, I think, a very, very classic masculine man thing. It's what do you do, right? It's like the first thing you ask another guy that you meet. You're like, waiting in the line to go to the urinal at like a football game, and you're like, so what do you do? Right? It's like you're basically trying to define this person. And we use that like mirror on ourselves as well. What do you do? Who are
Yeah.
you? Those are very similar questions. And the idea of looking for your identity and trying to find your sense of identity through your work, it feels like it's been culturally set into like who we are. You know what I mean? Like our parents were like that, our parents were like that, but I don't know if there was really any other options back then. And now that everything has kind of been exploded and like decoupled from one another, and you know, everyone's kind of like floating in this world of like Instagram and TikTok and work, and you know, not really sure what the next thing is going to be. I imagine it's really difficult to find or accept a sense of identity that doesn't necessarily couple you with like everything that comes along with that bucket of whatever it is that you would do otherwise.
Yeah, and I've always been like a super intense guy. So whatever I've done, you know, my sights have always been on excelling and becoming a master of it. And so I think inherently it kind of, I don't know, lent itself to being unbalanced, right? Like pouring myself into that. And then, you know, every waking moment spent doing, you know, pursuing whatever I was pursuing at the time. Yeah, it kind of took over an identity, you know. And so, you know, I like the way you kind of, you talk about it, because I definitely relate to like the identity. I don't want to call it a crisis because it's not. It's far
That's like
from
too
it, right?
dramatic. That's like too dramatic of a word for it.
Yeah, but there's this like angst uh in terms of like, oh, who am I? And like I meet people who don't know me or know me in my current context, right? And they don't know about the past 30 years, you know. And then like I have friends from like in my 20s that really don't understand what I'm doing now. And so it's been an interesting process in terms of like establishing relationships with others. And I think a lot of times like we define who we are, we find out who we are through the relationships we have. And so yeah, it's interesting, you know. It's you know, meeting new people, it's like, hey, what do you do? And it's like, oh, like I hate that question.
Yeah.
Because one, it's just hard for me to define, and I always feel like I'm giving an elevator pitch,
Yeah.
which is just feels, you know, disingenuous or incomplete. Maybe that's a better way, right?
Yeah. It also doesn't, a lot of what um a lot of what work and career has become in the past 5 years or 10 years doesn't really fit into an easy description. You can't say I'm an accountant, I'm a
Right.
lawyer, I'm a doctor, I'm, you know, I'm a garbage man, I'm a gardener, whatever, right? Like you can't really use those because that doesn't fit. Well, I even like my own family, you know, like my dad, we had dinner with like my entire family. I have two older brothers, they have kids, um, you know, and my eldest nephew, he's 10. That's why I know about teenagers. He wants to
Yeah.
be a YouTuber. He wants to have a YouTube channel, and he loves that I have a YouTube channel. Huge fan, does not care that it has nothing to do with any of his interests. As far as he's concerned, I have a YouTube channel, and that's really cool. And I should be playing Minecraft or Roblox or whatever the name of the game is. And
Yeah.
he goes, you know, at the dinner table, he says this. He says, I want to be a YouTuber when I grow up. And my dad, who knows what I do, is like, what's a YouTuber? So there's no like there's no real sense of like you can't communicate what it is that we do on a regular basis as our jobs as an identifier anymore because of how broad those terms have become. And maybe you lose something in that because there's no communication there, or maybe you gain something because then it forces you to think of things differently.
Yeah, there's a bunch of like preconceived ideas, right? I mean, I was a professional climber for a long time, and so it's like, oh, what do you do? I climb, and like, there's that like, well, what do you mean you climb? Like, and so like having to go into like what that means, right? Or hey, like I'm a firefighter, right? And so how, like, I think a lot of the way I define myself is on things I've done. Um, and I think the more things that I do, the harder it is to define myself to other people. And so honestly, I just don't even try. Like, um, and I don't, you know, a lot of people don't know, you know, that like I traveled the world climbing and I have like world speed records and like all this stuff, right? Because I don't talk about it because it's not, that's what I did. And it's not like I'm trying to hold on to that to define me, even though it has molded me into the person I am. And honestly, that's how I kind of feel with kids. You know, it's like 13 years of being a father and trying to figure it out, because it's like I haven't figured it out yet. And yeah, so it's I don't know, it's tough. I don't have an answer. I just know that like my efforts in trying to meet people is try to, you know, what's important is what I do today, because what I did yesterday doesn't hold much water, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um Even though it's made me who I am, and you know, helped me kind of cultivate the life I have. I mean, it's awesome. But especially with it, like my daughters, right? Like they've they know all these like phases in my life, and it doesn't, at the end of the day, it's like I'm still dad, right? And it's like if I'm impatient one day, or you know, if you know, we're having special, like it's all defined in the moment, which has made me really appreciate that, right? So it's like if I'm impatient and frustrated, like that's who I am, right? And if I'm
Mhm.
like, you know, loving and just joyful and really in the moment, well, that's who I am at that moment. And it also makes it's like almost making it that much more difficult, because it's like, well, then am I like schizophrenic? Because it's like I'm changing every day, every week. Um, and I think that's probably the biggest thing that like fatherhood, like being a parent, has brought out in me, right?